In this lesson, we will talk about the role that hierarchy plays as a means of organization within our composition. Okay, so I'm over here now. We're kind of out of our principles bucket now that we've talked about all of those, and hopefully you have a little bit better understanding of what some of those principles mean. And now we're moving on to hierarchy. So what is hierarchy, and why haven't I classified it as a principle? Well, hierarchy is the order of importance in a group. In design, we use hierarchy as a means of organizing information so that it can be composed in the best way to communicate our message. So hierarchy really isn't necessarily a principle, it's simply an organizational element to organize those principles that you're using. So your principles can either enforce or maybe kind of weaken the hierarchy that you create. So let's talk about how we can use those principles to create a hierarchy within this composition that you see right here. So the order of importance here is which step, obviously, that this is. This is the most important thing, the first thing that you look at. And as I scrub through there, the way that this text is introduced is going to be in the order that you would continue to read that. So just scrubbing from 28 to 30, you already see that there is a big difference in what's the most important and the order that you're supposed to read it in. So we read step 2 here first, simply because it's the largest and it's at the top. So if my step 2 was down here at the bottom or maybe over here on the side, might not be as effective, especially because this is motion design. If this was oriented on its side, it's not going to be as easy to read as if it was on some sort of a print document that you could maybe kind of rotate around a little bit. So keep in mind that when you're designing for motion, you're not designing for print. People don't want to crane their necks to see what they need to read on the television. If you have it over here on the side or turned on its side or something, it's going to feel just maybe like it's not communicating as best as it could for the motion sort of avenue that you've taken your message down. So let's continue to scrub forward here. And it appears that as this kind of scoots over here into the left, it becomes less important. We have all this negative space here now. It's still the only thing on screen, but we've allowed for all of this space to let us introduce another element. So as I continue to scrub through, we have these two new elements. And because we've already read this, we are now just going to look at these two icons that we have here. Then we also have some motion come in here. You choose one of those options, and then our text moves down. So now this has been realigned so that the text kind of lines up with our phone that's animated in. Now, the hierarchy in this starts out as the text being the most important. Then it's animated away, and the icons become more important. Then as they animate away, even though our text is still there, it keeps its same size, so now our phone is the most important thing. Then we continue to scrub through, and now we have this hierarchy. As this text begins to change, you come back over here and start reading this, because that disappears, the new text comes in. And it comes in just before this begins to animate. So we have kind of this interest here, maybe kind of moves away just a little bit because nothing's happening on the phone screen. Okay, so let's move on to our second example. Go ahead and double click that hierarchy too. And now let's talk about the hierarchy of this shot and kind of how it relates to the text and image that you see here. So this feels a lot different than the hierarchy that we were talking about in our first example, because the text feels automatically very secondary to the image. So the hierarchy in this shot would definitely be our image is the most important thing. Then this kind of label here is the second most important thing. Then we see the name of this course, and then the person that created it is the least important here at the bottom with that piece of information there. So whenever you're organizing this hierarchy, you probably, if you were having to create a shot like this and you were using a lower third, you would have what the name of or all the text that you would have to be using. So you would have to go through and figure out which elements were most important, had middle importance, and were least important. So obviously when you have a beautiful image like this, you automatically would choose a lower third type of just presentation here so that you're able to really just capitalize on how big and beautiful this image is. Then the next thing that you would worry about is this creative development label that you would see here, because that doesn't change from one shot to the other. You'll notice that as I scrub through this, this piece of information is going to remain the same. So that kind of automatically denotes the next level of importance there, simply because that's almost the bucket that these different videos would belong in. And then this changes with each course, so that's automatically going to have a little bit lesser importance. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. You see so many lower thirds that don't really have a real sense of hierarchy, and you're not really sure which part of it to look at and why is this even here. I just want to look at the image. So whenever you have your lower third, you want to make sure that it's not creating a competition with the image that you're trying to promote. All right, let's look at our third example. Now here, I am going to actually add the text to this shot. So I want to talk about how you can use negative space or dead space in a shot as a place to convey information. So as I scrub through this, notice that our person is kind of just always over here on the right-hand side. And for the most part, at the end here, it's never more than taking up half the screen. So this area of our screen is never going to have any action happening in it. Our camera is really just panning across it. So if we were using this shot and we needed to convey a message, maybe something about libraries, like visit your local library, we could put that text right here. So let's go ahead and do that. Just practice a little bit how we would line up text to create the hierarchy between our image and our text. So come up here, go to Window. We'll open up our character palette there. And I'm just using this font here, PFDIN. If you want to use a font that looks similar to mine, you just would want to use a condensed sans serif. Now, you don't have to follow along with this part, but this is just a little bit of practice for you to be able to see how I would set this up. So I'm going to be just typing in visit your local. And then library is kind of the payoff here that I'm wanting the people to go to. So I'm going to drop that down onto the next line. So right now, with just the little piece of text that we've created, there doesn't feel like a real sense of hierarchy within the text that we've created. It just feels like it's been typed out and maybe this second one got pushed onto another line because the text box wasn't big enough. And that is not my intention. I want to come in here and make this library feel a lot bigger and more important. But I also want to make sure that I don't have my whole bit of text too far over so that it's interfering with the motion that we have created in our shot. So I don't want this to interfere with this area here. So I'm going to make sure that I keep it over here on the left side. So I'm going to go up there, grab my text tool. Let's just highlight library. Now there's some things I can do to this bit of text to really make it feel like that hierarchy is being pushed. So let's make it a little bit bigger first. And then I'm going to push that down just so that it doesn't feel like it's interfering with that top part. And maybe we want to make this all caps, so I can just click that there. And I don't want this part to be italic, so I'm going to come in there and just make it bold instead. And automatically, this already feels like the text just makes a lot more sense. I'm going to come in there and change my resolution to full just so I can see how the word is fitting together. You might want to kern those letters together a little bit better there. Maybe we want to track out this little piece of text just so that that is lining up with the A. We could track it out even a little bit further and line that up with the R. Now, that is definitely something that we probably should talk about, is the alignment. So when you're setting up hierarchy within something that's using text, alignment is a big part of what makes the whole thing feel unified. So you need to just keep in mind that the alignment of your letters is going to affect whether or not something feels like it's finished in the end. So there's an intention here that I'm lining up this straight L, the straight edge of the L, with the straight edge of the R, instead of just leaving it where it was in the beginning. Okay, so now that we have this bit of text set up and it really feels like a cohesive message, the text looks like it fits together pretty well, you could come in here and start to figure out exactly where the piece of text should be positioned in relation to your shot. So to help me with this, I'm going to turn on my title action safe grid. So to do that, you just come down right there to this lower left hand corner, click title action safe. And a lot of times I will use this even when I know that the actual purpose of title action safe, which is to not let the edges of an HD video fall off the sides of a kind of an old square tube style TV. Even though I know that's what it's for, I like to use these lines as a kind of just a means of grid design and letting me align things just so I have kind of a standardized idea of how close something should be to the edge. So I like to come in here and I'll kind of use this side tick mark there to align this piece of text right there. I have this little red square that I'm lining up with that tick mark just to put it right in the middle. And then this line I'm aligning it with on the side so that this margin you see there is going to remain consistent. So at this point, I will probably come in here and change the size of my text based on how much room is left between the edge of this bit of text and my focal point. So if you wanted to, you could even use some rulers here. So let's talk about that. Let's turn those on. I'm going to turn on rulers there. And by having rulers turned on, I can use guides. So what I'm going to do is kind of slide over here all the way to the end. And just right about there is where this final line is going to be, where we don't ever want to cross this edge. So that feels like it's pretty much right in the center of our composition. You'll notice that the crosshairs that are created with the title action safe are lining up pretty closely to this guide that we've created. So if I turn off that title action safe, let's just take a look at the optical spacing of the margins here on the left and right of our bit of text. And this really appears that we have pretty much pushed the limits with the size of text that we've created. So if we'd started out with our text maybe looking something like this, this gets a little too close to the focal point. So you would want to scale that down so that the margin on the right side matches this kind of predetermined margin that you see there on the left. So I scrub through that, and it never feels like too much tension is created between what she's holding and using here right in the middle and our bit of text. So we don't have really a conflict there. So as you can see, this has a lot to do with proximity, what we talked about in our earlier lessons. And it also has to do with contrast. So you see that I automatically chose kind of this white color here, and that's just because this shot here on the left side feels a little bit dark. So I know that white text is going to be readable on this type of a background. Even when it moves in front of some of these lighter books, that stark white still feels very readable in comparison. So there's a lot of elements that you have to keep in mind. If I had used a lighter color text, that would make this less important and therefore kind of convolute that hierarchy that I'm trying to establish between my image and my text. So in this lesson, we learned that hierarchy is important for organizing the information that we want our readers to understand in a specific order. We also learned that motion design allows us to emphasize hierarchy by having the flexibility in our design to move our elements into positions and sizes that give a sense of lesser or greater importance.